Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Data Demos, the Northeast edition. This is an hour and a half brought to you by Boom Live. That's boomlive.in. If you don't know us, we are fact checkers. We're based in India and in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. And in India, we do fact checks in English, Hindi, and Bengali. Since December this 2023, we've also been running the Northeast Facts Network. And as part of that, we've done multiple events. I'll tell you about all of that in a moment. But here's a quick introduction. I am HR Venkatesh. I'm the Director Training and Research here at Boom Live. And we also have with us our team. We have Dr. Sabina Rahman. She's the project lead at the Northeast Facts Network. We have Divya Chandra, who is our fact-checking trainer, and Tita Ghosh, who's our producer and reporter. This is our fourth event, and the first was a panel discussion simply on fact checking in the Northeast and how difficult it is. Then we had a how-to event, and we called it Field Guide to Research in Northeast India. And in April, we had a fact-checking mail in which we did a number of workshops. This was done in Guwahati. We also had a session on how to do fact-checking during conflict situations or conflict reporting. And today is our fourth event, and we have four very exciting speakers whom I will introduce now. They have two things in common. They're all experts in data, and they're very nice people. So here's the format. It's very simple. Each speaker speaks, or rather shows you something for 10 minutes, speaks and shows for 10 minutes, and then takes questions for 10 minutes. We'll try to stick to the schedule, but we won't be like super tough about it. So keep the questions coming in the box where you put in your questions right from the beginning when a speaker speaks, because we'll take their questions for 10 minutes and then we move on to the next speaker. So let me introduce them quickly in the reverse order of appearance. We have at 7:40 p.m. tonight Abhinav Kumar, who is the tech lead at Civic Data Lab. I'll do another one-line intro before each speaker. Before that, at 7:20 p.m., we have Rukmini S., who's the author of Whole Numbers and Half Truths and founder of Data for India. We have at 7 p.m. Aditi Bhaumik, who is a PhD candidate in economics and public policy, I believe, at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. But first, we are going to start off with Dr. Tuminthang Hamso, who's currently an economics and statistics officer at the government of Nagaland. He's worked at several levels of government in the state of Nagaland. He's also an alumnus of the University of Hyderabad. So with that, the floor is yours. I think we've saved a few minutes already. So Tuminthang, it's over to you. And here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start the clock as you're just setting up and give a 1 minute to go buzzer sort of thing when it's time for you to wrap up. We'll try to stick to time. So it's over to you.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Good evening, everyone. Time is of the essence. So as I share my screen, I extend my sincere gratitude to Boom for having me, and also expresses my earnest appreciation for the notable initiative and much needed intervention in relation to information dissemination, and consequently on popular media and academic discourse in and of Northeastern region and beyond. So I have titled my brief talk, rather my opening presentation, as Data, Research and Policy Making in Northeast India. In my current talk by data, I'm not referring to what is now called big data sourced from internet, social media, and so on. I will explain in a while what I refer to when I say data. So to begin with, what is the state of data in northeastern states? So the scenario of data expressly of official statistics. By official statistics, I refer to the data generated by governmental agencies, state as well as central agencies. So the scenario of official statistics in the northeastern states is characterized by quantitative and qualitative limitations. Quantitatively, a marked unavailability of data exists on certain socio-economic and political aspects, an example of which I will cite in a while. And quantitatively, there is an inadequacy as well as unreliability of certain available data. Scholars working on Northeast region have similarly written on the same. Agrawal and Kumar, for an instance, writes, most academic studies on India that rely on statistics limit themselves to major states for want of data and exclude the Northeast region.
To Mithun, I
So
think
what
you're
explains,
sorry to interrupt, apologies, but I think your
yes,
slides are not moving.
oh,
If you just
is
click
it
on present something or just put the arrow down, it'll automatically go to the next slide.
is it moving now?
No,
Oh, still it's not moving.
no, it's fine, but don't worry about it because we budgeted for some extra time to sort these things out. Maybe if you just move the, I don't know, if you're moving, I can see the number one slide highlighted in orange. So maybe if you just move it and click on the next one, it might work.
I'm doing that, but strangely it's not working.
Are you sharing your entire screen or are you sharing a particular tab? Because at times that messes things up. If you share your entire screen, that
There
should work.
again. Is it
Yes, yes. I think
okay?
just try going forward and backward once. Maybe by clicking on the
It's not
keyboard.
working.
Right? Oh, it's not. Okay. So how about this? Do you want to take some more time and maybe we can ask our next speaker to start, or should we try again? Let's try again.
Is it working now? Anyway, the slides are not important. I can
No, we
continue
can see
without
that.
the slides
We can see
if
your
that's
slides.
okay.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
see your slides. We'll just try and get it right because it's useful as a visual thing. But yeah, let's try it.
Okay.
If not, why don't you try moving the slide now because we can see it in big, right? We can see it fully. Maybe just use the arrow, but I'm sure you're trying that already.
Yeah, I've tried that, but it's not working.
Yeah, we can see.
It's not moving.
Okay, so why don't you show us that one relevant thing, and then when you need to move to the next slide, you don't have to use all the slides. Just stop sharing, move to the next slide, and then share again. So we'll give you a little extra time for that.
Okay, sure.
So let's pick up where you left off, and I'm resetting my clock.
Okay. Is it moving?
No, we haven't shared yet, Tumintang.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think I'll move like this.
It's fine. It's fine now. It's fine now. Yeah, it's
Okay.
fine. It's absolutely fine. So go take it away.
Okay, so I have just spoken about the state of data in northeastern states. Now I will move on to the next question. What explains the state of data in the region? So from my own experience working with the government of Nagaland on official statistics, as well as from my interaction with the government officials from the region involved in data generation, collation, estimation, and dissemination, it emerges that a significant causal factor of the stated quantitative and qualitative data constraints is inadequate capacity of technical as well as financial nature. Having stated that, an example of data unavailability owing to such a capacity limitation is the absence of what is called district domestic product. District domestic product is absent in all the northeastern states, and it is a disaggregated measurement of the size of an economy at the district level. It is the critical statistic to make district-specific policy making. Similarly, certain other critical data are unavailable owing to such capacity limitation. All this in turn reflects the limited importance given to evidence-based policy debates and data-driven policymaking in the region. In perspective, the poor quality of data is also reflective of the poor policy discourse and policymaking in the region. By corollary, it is therefore expected that if policy debate and policy making become increasingly data-driven, data will be given importance, and the state of data availability as well as data quality will consequently improve. Another consequential factor that explains the state of data, the prevailing state of data in the region, is the political economy of data in the region, which I will explain at the end. So moving on, how does the existing data constraint inform the prevailing nature of research in the Northeast? The prevailing data constraints are, of course, limitations to doing research in the region. The limitation is, however, more pronounced, specifically to doing research based on secondary quantitative data sources. Researchers therefore have to rely on primary data or self-generated data. Relying on primary data often posed as a challenge to researchers with time and financial constraints, which is often the case. Such a data constraint therefore informs or explains to an extent the relatively limited literature on the region based on quantitative secondary data sources. The existing literature on the region is therefore mostly from the disciplines such as anthropology, sociology, and such like, that rely largely on primary data with qualitative research methodology such as ethnography and so on. The prevailing literature is markedly limited from disciplines and on research questions that rely on quantitative secondary data, say economics. On the whole, therefore, research work based on quantitative data in the region is limited, owing to, at least partially, the insufficiency of quantitative data. Another aspect of research limitation arising from having to work with primary data is the inability to do what is known as time series analysis. If you aren't aware of time series analysis, you will come to know it as I move on. Primary data mostly provides what is called cross-sectional data. Cross-sectional data refers to a kind of data that gives a snapshot of a reality at a particular point in time. Say, the average income of the different tribes in Assam in a particular year, say 2023. That's an example of cross-sectional data. So in case of an unavailability of time series data, say the average income of the different tribes in Assam in a time period from 1993 to 2023. That's an example of time series data. So in such a circumstance of unavailability of time series data, trend analysis, that is assessment of progress or regress of certain aspects of societal importance, cannot be ascertained. With cross-sectional data obtained through primary data collection by independent researchers, only the prevailing state and not the continual changing conditions of certain research subjects can be assessed. The so-called longitudinal research attempting to answer questions of changing states across time is therefore limited by the inadequacy of quality time series data. Of note, quantitative time series data, which are employable for longitudinal studies, can only be generated in most cases by governmental agencies owing to the resource demands for such an exercise. Imagine if any of us as an independent researcher is to collect relevant data and estimate the average income of Assam or even a singular village in Nagaland every year. It will be impractical owing to resource constraints. Individual researchers and private research institutions are likewise unable to generate and thereby unable to carry out such often critical research. It may be emphasized, therefore, if only in passing, that data ought to be regarded as merit good or public good and should be produced by the state for common good at large. So to end with, what is the political economy of data in the northeastern states? So a factor of immense salience that affects the quality of data generation in the northeastern states is an aspect related to the political economy of the region. My reference to political economy will become clear as I move on. So the region, to begin with, is characterized by heterogeneous social composition, with the constituent communities sometimes in explicit conflict, including violence, and often in implicit competition with each other for states' resources, say employment opportunities in the government sector and such like. So such a rivalrous relationship is also reflected in the competitive nature or politicized nature of data generation. In perspective, while certain statistics are overreported, some statistics are underreported to gain more access to states' resources vis-a-vis other communities. The employment of data, therefore, should be made with an awareness of such and other contextual specificities, in the absence of which scholarly works based on such data informing policy discourse and policy making will be inaccurate, engendering inaccurate diagnosis of social realities and thereby inaccurate prescriptions for social problems. One way to avoid such concerns is to supplement the available data by personal observation, ethnography, and on the whole by getting acquainted with the context to the practical extent possible. Or even today, in many ways, is the step in that direction, for which I once again acknowledge Boom. And with that, I'm hopefully ending my presentation on time.
Yeah, I didn't even need to do the 1 minute buzzer. So thank you so much, Tumintam. You've given us a lot of room, food for thought, as they say. It's coming to dinner time soon, so I suppose that's a decent reference. So time for questions. We have 10 minutes for questions before we move on to the next person. So keep your questions coming. If you don't have any questions right now, maybe ask them and I will try to get them answered, later. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions to Mintang to get it started. You spoke about the limitations of getting data in the Northeast. What's kind of like a shortcut? I mean, when I was looking through your slides, I was thinking, it's the same old. Let's try and figure out who we know in the Northeast or in that particular state in Nagaland. Let's ask them personally. It feels like in the absence of any resources or sources. I mean, I'm sure there are, and we'll ask you for resources and sources. But are there any sources really for the public at large or even experts to focus on, especially when they're coming in afresh?
Yeah, so in addition to the data relating to notice that one can access from RBI and other central institutions, one significant data source is the Department of Economics and Statistics in each state. The Department of Economics and Statistics, Government of Nagaland, uploads the reports that it publishes, and it publishes a lot of reports, disaster statistics, gender statistics, um, reports relating to the economy of the state, uh, reports relating to rural development, and including thematic studies on different economic subjects, different social subjects, and so on. So, DES, Department of Economics and Statistics websites in all the northeastern states uh, can be an important source for outsiders, can be an important first step for outsiders to access data on northeastern states. Apart from that, environmental related data one can obtain from uh, state pollution control boards, uh, which is also underutilized, like the Department of Economics and Statistics. So state pollution control boards have data uh, on district-wise air pollution and other pollution data. So those are two important data sources that one can access, digitally available uh, for outsiders than anyone interested in doing research on um, Northeast.
Okay. Any questions? Also a reminder to our panelists, co-panelists, go ahead and ask questions if you have any.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Yeah, just, okay, fine, ask the question, but ideally we would like you to put it in the chat, but go for it now.
Okay, I'm Bibin Khadka, I'm from Nepal, and I'm doing research in international trade. So I was concerned about the data availability of northeastern part of India. So it's like Nepal and northeast part of India shares some kind of similarity in geographical situation. So I just wanted to know about how is the availability of trade data in the northeast. And one question is that, and other question is, now I'm doing a research using Nepal Living Standard Survey. So it's kind of survey data and it's kind of household data. So it uses the methodology of uh, Living Standard Measurement Survey of World Bank. So how hard or how can you get data, just survey data in the Middle East, Eastern part of Northeast part of India? I mean, is it so easy or is it hard to get survey data and trade data? Thank you.
Thank you, Vipin, for the questions. Regarding trade data, yes, you can have access to trade data. For internal trade data, for domestic trade data, one can approach the municipal councils, also known as town councils. They maintain trade data, which is again underutilized in the context of Northeast. Not many people approach the municipal councils for internal trade data. They also maintain and control and govern and regulate uh, prices of goods and services at the local level. So for internal trade data in the context of Northeast, one can approach the municipal councils. For international trade data, I have not worked on international trade. However, I am positive that one can get data on northeastern states from Exim Bank, Export and Import Bank. Exim Bank is a national institution which also has a regional branch in the Northeast. And I'm positive that it maintains data on international trade with regard to the northeastern states. Now, the next question on survey, is it difficult or is it not? Whatever survey data are available at the national level are also available at the regional level and at the northeastern states level. However, like the concerns that I have raised, one should be aware of the context. One should be aware of the embeddedness of data generation in context. So scholars have again raised concerns about the reliability of survey data on Northeast. So survey data are available. However, the caveats that I have raised should be borne in mind. I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you, Tumben.
Okay, we have another question, and I think we'll stop it after this question. We'll go to the next speaker then. So this is a question that's come in from AV in the chat box. AV asks, "Hi, Dr. Hamso. I hear talk of digitization of data collection methods these days, of how it might make data collection easier, of how it might make large-scale data collection, that is a census, easier. I was wondering, have digital electronic data collection methods, have they proliferated in the Northeast? And if they have, what has been their impact?"
Great question. I'm not sure about the other northeastern states. However, as far as the state of Nagaland is concerned, so far, data collection is mostly under the regime of the so-called PAPI, paper-assisted personal interview. Now I'm with Department of Economics and Statistics, and starting this year, we are making progress to transition from PAPI to CAPI, computer-assisted personal interview, with GIS, decking, and so on, in order to improve data collection, in order to improve the so collected data reliability. So it is in the process. We are transitioning to CAPI, digital collection of data. So proliferated, none at all. We are only starting.
Okay, that's that answered. Before we move on, Tamintang, I want to ask you, you're a government worker, obviously, or you work for the government. Are you available technically for people to contact you and then if they have any questions? And if so,
Yeah,
what is the...
sure. Yeah. Although with a disclaimer of sort, I will not be available as a government servant, but in my own capacity as a researcher, yeah, I'll be available for any assistance.
Okay. Actually, there's a very quick question from Dhriti, who asks, I want to know, yeah, Aditi's answered it, but I want to know where one can get election-specific data, specifically the demographic information of Legislative Assembly members of Northeast India. There are sources like the Parliament Library for MPs, but they only have data available from 2006. So any idea?
Again, for that, with respect to Nagaland, the department with which I am currently working with is in the process of publishing election reports. So once the report is published, it will be available on the department's website, accessible online.
Okay. Tumintang, I thank you so much. I request you to, if you can, answer these questions on chat by typing in the answers. Let's move ahead now to Aditi Bhaumik, who is our next speaker. Aditi is a PhD candidate right now, but has also done a lot of data work in the past. I know this personally. And it's over to you, Aditi. And I'll start the clock.
Sounds good. Let me just, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Let me remove this ugly banner to the bottom. Okay. This is actually very exciting for me because normally I have to make boring academic seminar style presentations. So as you can see, I went a little bit crazy with the colors and the formatting. So bear with that. as Venkatesh said, I'm a second-year PhD student at the Harvard Kennedy School, focusing on economics and public policy. In my own research, I mostly study female labor force participation, social norms as a barrier to female labor force participation, and basically anything and everything related to gender inequality in India. What I do differently is I try to tap into unique and novel data sources at scale to inform my research. So based on my experience from my own research and my experience with the organization that I was associated with before, Development Data Lab, I just wanted to introduce all of you to a couple of publicly available, relatively high resolution data resources that exist for your usage in your respective projects and work, whether you are journalists, whether you work at a think tank, whether you're a freelance writer who likes relying on data and evidence-based narratives, or whether you're a researcher. Okay, so just real quick. So in the background, what you see on the slide, those are actually from the socioeconomic and caste census from 2011. That's district level poverty rates in the northeastern region. So this is just to give you a flavor of what is possible. Now, it's already been flagged that it's difficult to rely on a single data source. For instance, if you're pulling numbers from the census, there's lots of issues in how the data are collected, and there's overcounting, underreporting in certain areas and not others. My thumb rule for dealing with those concerns has always been triangulation. And what I mean by that is don't rely on just a single data source. If you're working with the census data, also pull in sample survey data, also pull in data from other sources, and everything should basically be going in the same direction. So do that extra kind of detective work to make sure you feel confident about the story that you're saying. So that's just something I wanted to get out there. So today's presentation, I just wanted to walk you through what are these different buckets of data that you can tap into that already exist. But I would like to say kind of working blind with publicly available data is not enough. As the previous speaker mentioned, it's on all of us to do the additional homework on really getting up to speed with the contextual knowledge and speak to people, speak to government officers at the block level and so on, speak to residents to make sure that you're not missing something. Okay, with that, let me just walk you through what's available. I hope everyone can see everything.
Yes.
Okay, so first let me walk you through what are the administrative data that you should keep in your mind. Till date, we have 3 rounds of the population census data that are available. These are publicly available on multiple sources on the developmentdatalab.org website where I used to work at, and even NCAER has a website where they publicly host it, pretty easy to pull down. Using these census records, so the population census data is available at the village and town level. It's pretty unwieldy to work with, work at that level of granularity because it's pretty massive. So you can pull district level, sub-district level. So sub-district is a tehsil level aggregates of these population census data. So the population census data typically has population counts, demographic breakdowns at the village and town level. It also has what they call the village and town amenities. So that tells you kind of the number of hospital, the number of beds, the number of nurses, also things like what is the primary commodity grown in each village and so on. So it's pretty rich. Separately, you have the economic census, also 4 rounds of data available till date. This is not very, this is kind of lesser known than the population census. So this is kind of every 10 years. It's supposed to be every 10 years. It's supposed to be a kind of a census of all 65 million non-farm establishments, so all non-agricultural commercial entities. So this does also include the informal kirane ka dukaan and mom and pop shops, and this also includes informal labor and so on. So that's a place to tap into for informal employment as well. So the economic census is something that I have used a lot in my research. Then separately, of course, you have 1 round of the socioeconomic and caste census, and that are publicly available. I think the most convenient place to look at is the development.org Shrug website. I have links to districts I can share by different levels. By levels, I mean things like, say, in Dimapur, what is the share of secondary school educated folks in population and so on. Land ownership shares, poverty rates, consumption, and so on. A common gripe among people who work with data in civil society has been that the data at this point are very, very outdated. It's been more than 10 years since the last population census happened. So what do we do in the interim? Here I have a couple of ideas for you. The first is, if you're looking for administrative data, there's a massive Mission Antodaya data set that is publicly available through the Ministry of Rural Development. And it's honestly the equivalent of a population census, but just for rural areas. So this is village level data, and you have population estimates, you have estimates on coverage of various welfare schemes, share covered by various welfare schemes, and so on. So that's a very rich data set, also publicly available. So have a look at that. Most importantly, it's recent, right? So you have data from 2020. So that's what you have going on in the administrative data bucket. But like I said, don't just rely on one bucket. What else do you have at hand? Something that I go back to again and again is the National Family and Health Survey, so the NFHS, or in other countries, the DHS. So the two rounds that I have worked with a lot are the 2014 and 2019 rounds. They are particularly appealing to me because you also have geographic coordinates available. So I use those geographic coordinates to link across other data sets. Extremely rich for anyone who's looked into it. The screen grab on the slide is from this dashboard that the Harvard, I want to say it's the Harvard School of Public Health, but I'd have to double check. They put it up, and you can basically, on that dashboard, you can play around and pick variables you want to, and it allows you to link across rounds, and you can basically pull down the data at the district level. That particular map is the change in share of women who report having anemia at the district level between 2006 to 2021. So you can, if it's too much for you to process the actual bulky data sets and kind of work through it, you have dashboards like those available as a starting point. Finally, a data set that I really rely on is the IHDS, which Sonal Desai has been kind of at the helm of. So this is the, oh gosh, I hope I get this right, India Human and Development Survey. Oh, I hope I didn't mess that up. But anyhow, it's the IHDS. The reason the IHDS really appeals to me, again, it's a national household survey. It's it covers some 100,000 individuals. It's a panel, so it's the same households that get surveyed every time they go back. So the panel is something that's appealing to me. It's representative at the district level, which is important. Also, it's one of the few publicly available data sources that I have come across that actually goes beyond the administrative caste categories of SC, ST, OBC, and so on. It actually asks people what the subcaste or tribe of the household is, which, as you can imagine, is particularly useful in the Northeastern context, not just the Northeast, really across the country, right? Jati remains the unit of access to economic resources, and without data disaggregated at those levels, you really can't say anything about how things have moved. So you actually have that. At the village and neighborhood level, it does have caste-wise population shares. So by caste, I mean like subcaste and tribe-wise population shares. What is the subcaste or tribe that owns the largest share of the land, and so on? I think that portion of it is relatively underutilized and something to look into. And it has a lot of other data ranging from anthropometric measures, which is height and weight records, test scores, Narega income, everything. So that's something I rely a lot on. So I walked you through administrative. Am I out of time?
No, 1 minute left.
Okay, awesome. And then the last bucket is satellite data. So especially places where you have these stories of kind of surveyors not actually, enumerators actually not going to the places and kind of staying in the city area and calling people up and trying to fill in the records because of terrain reasons. So especially when you have reliability concerns like that in a region like the Northeast, satellite data can be really helpful. Or when you have regions that are in conflict and data collection hasn't happened. Increasingly, places like the World Bank and all, they are doing evidence generation on places which have been in conflict for decades now, and they're relying heavily on satellite data. So some of the sources to consider are night lights data, forest cover, vegetation cover data. There's also Facebook has come up with population projections as of 2021. relative wealth index measures as of 2021. Again, these are also available on the Development Data Lab website, but also separately. Then there's satellite measures of temperature and rainfall, which I have been relying a lot of in my work, thinking about how climate change interacts with gender inequality. And the map that you're seeing up there is from the India WRIS website. That's kind of showing you land use at a hyper granular level. So what share of the land is under vegetation, what share is fallow, and so on. I was looking into this because I wanted to identify areas which were historically, which are traditionally under shifting cultivation and so on. So that's why I was digging into it. So just to give you a flavor that there's also satellite data to think about. So with these three buckets, you can kind of stitch up the story, but it requires a lot of, the barrier is at times contextual knowledge and at times technical upfront costs. So that's where these dashboards that I mentioned can be useful. And these are some of the resources that I just wanted to put out there. These are resources that are relatively straightforward to work with, where you aren't working with terabytes of data that you have to kind of work through. And yeah, I hope it's been helpful and you took something away from it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Questions, please? Otherwise, I'll get started with the question. So other than admin data, survey data and maps data or satellite data, are there any buckets that you think, is there a fourth bucket which is not reliable, or is there a category that you wish existed? I'm just trying to understand your perspective on how you look at data.
Sure. So at the outset, I said that I'm very interested in studying social norms, for instance, and most studies which think about social norms and how they affect inequality and how firm contracts are made and so on, these are small-scale ethnographic surveys. And in academia, disciplines don't talk to each other. So you have this rich anthropological data trove that doesn't talk to, or economists don't talk to that data trove and that knowledge that has been accumulated. So given my research interests, I deeply feel the lack of data on social norms, and it's something that I'm trying to work on during my research career. So I'd like to know things like, so I'm looking for concretely what I mean by that is data on prevalence of bride price, dowry, inheritance norms, and so on. So that's something I think about. There is a fourth bucket, actually, that, again, I rely on a lot for my own work, is researchers collect a lot of data for their academic projects. And of late, academic journals are pushing towards making analysis replicable. So a lot of researchers are compelled to make the underlying analysis data available. So there is the thing, it's called the Harvard Dataverse is what the website is. I have pulled a lot of data from people who put together a data set from a totally different project, and that's where I've got a lot of information from and merged it with other stuff for my own work. So that's also an interesting place to start. For instance, yeah, that's all I'll say about that. But to your question about what I wish existed, ethnographic data measures, reliable measures of social norms is a gap that I feel for my work, but
Okay.
I think.
Thanks. We have two questions. One, Pratna has raised her hand, and then we have a question from Umar. So Pratna, you go first, then Umar, and then we'll see if we have time.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, I'm Pratna. Aditi, thanks for the presentation. It's amazing to have again vantage point view of how the sources of data and all. So you also Venkatesh, you also mentioned what other types of data we can have, and Aditi, you also mentioned that there can be ethnographic data as well. And you also mentioned that the disciplines, not only in academia, but even in policy circle, even in practice, there is gaps between the different disciplines. So in case of Northeast, so I work in the Bodoland region of Northeast. I work with a policy organization, policy and governance. And from my experience, so I see that along with this quantitative data, there is a need to probably source or like have ethnographic and other qualitative data in one place as well, or like for researchers and policymakers or whoever are interested and need this data, to have this kind of sources or do something about it, to simply put it. So do you think it can be possible, or do you have any suggestion to probably envision something towards that? Thank you.
I think you know what I want from the next 5 years of my life. So that's so I work very closely. My advisor at Harvard is Professor Ileana La Ferrara. She's done a lot of work around social norms, specifically around, say, female genital cutting and all of those practices, and on kinship institutions and community participation institutions. So that's been her line of work, but in the sub-Saharan African context. So I draw a lot of inspiration from her work, and over the next 5 or 6 years, my vision is to put together kind of publicly available archives that people can continually contribute to, which has kind of these community level ethnographic measures that you're talking about. I think there's two things. One is having those data available, and the second is demonstrating what you can do with it. Like, everyone is intellectually interested in this idea of social norms, but people who are very quantitatively minded, and all of us in our work, when push comes to shove, we wouldn't really know what exactly to do with it. So I personally want to make progress on both making those data available and kind of demonstration on how these measures becoming available can improve our understanding of poverty and inequality and impact of policy and so on. So that's what I'm working on. I'll keep you posted, Pratna, on if I make any progress, but that's my vision of where I'd like to see kind of this discipline of development policy and research to go.
Umar has a question, and then Vandana and Dhriti, but again, we don't have time. So take Umar's question: is a socioeconomic data based on religion or ethnic community available? And if you don't have the answer, you can always come back to it later. And yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So Umar, yes, these data are available. You may want to start by looking at all of the survey data I mentioned, right? The NFHS rounds, IHTS, they all collect religion. So religion and ethnic community at the level of SC, ST, just forward cast by admin classification standards. Those categories are available. You can always disaggregate by those. If you want to go a level deeper and actually think about the jatis and tribes, IHTS is a useful source to look at. Again, publicly available. I think some of the older rounds of the NFHS, if I'm not mistaken, some of the older rounds also used to collect the jati and tribe level information. You can do the disaggregation. I haven't worked with those yet. So yeah, they're totally available. And then we're doing other questions on the chat, is it?
Yeah, if you can just write back on the chat so that everyone else can read the answer, that'll be helpful. And if there's time at the end of the event, we can always come to these questions. But I think thank you so much on that note, Aditi, and just do let us know on chat as well how people can get in touch with you, so they may ask questions. I think Tumithung has left an email behind. That's benthunghmt@gmail.com. So on that note, it's over to our next speaker. That's Rukmini S. And she's going to talk about data for India. And I just hand it over just like that.
Thanks, Venkatesh. You're able to hear me. Okay. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. And I really enjoyed hearing the presentations before me. I'm going to share my screen, but not. Okay. So just a little bit to set some context. So I don't come from an academic background, and most of my work with Indian data has been sort of figure it out on the job, first as a journalist and now more broadly communicating data to create sort of public goods around socioeconomic data around India. I'll just talk a little bit briefly in the end about data for India, while just starting us off on a couple of things I wanted us to think about. So a lot of my work involves looking at many of the large data sets that have been mentioned before. This includes the census, national sample surveys, National Family Health Survey, India Human Development Survey, big surveys around opinion polling, which, as I'll explain in a bit, look at the northeastern states in a sort of spectrum of granularity. And I think one of my big sort of sources of learning and maybe even agitation over the last couple of years has been the feeling that there is a lot that goes unsaid about large Indian public data sets, or rather than unsaid, I would say there's sort of limited knowledge among a few people about how these data sets can be used, and more importantly about what is not good enough or problematic within those. And I'm very sort of invested in making this knowledge more widely available. So I do want to start with, and I will end with the point that what I want to do is encourage and empower more people to use and look at Indian data. So the idea is not for this to be scare tactics, but there are certain hygiene checks that I would encourage people using large Indian data sets to look at. This is not exhaustive, and I'm happy to talk more to people working with Indian data, both in terms of helping people in the Northeast who would like some sort of guidance towards accessing the data for the questions they have in mind, as well as more detail on these hygiene checks. So let me just call this a sort of brief overview. So most of the data sets that I'm going to talk about do cover individual northeastern states. So you will find them in the list in both the sort of sample households list as well as the overall findings in every table. You will find individual northeastern states there. But it becomes very important to look at the sample size when you are doing further slicing and dicing of the data. And this is something that I have realized only much later, and now makes me go back and look at both journalistic and research work with new eyes. So, for example, if you look at anything that requires a slice into 4 or more categories. So if you were comparing Indian states and you were looking at caste groups within or tribal groups within those states, or if you were looking at rural and urban within a state and you were dividing them into, say, 5 income groups by either income from the IHTS or by consumption expenditure from the NSS. What this ends up doing is it creates a very narrow slice. The overall number of sample households that you're looking at for that slice becomes very small. Now, this is less of a problem for large states in which the sample runs into thousands of households, but it becomes very significant when it comes to states in which the sample is much smaller. However, I don't feel like this seems to stop a lot of research. So you see, sometimes you feel good about the fact that you are seeing individual northeastern states mentioned, that they haven't been entirely ignored and just the sort of mainland states are being looked at. However, if you go to a particular slice and then go back to look at the number of sample households, it sometimes is in the single digits, because once you've done all those slices, I have seen working papers widely cited, including tables in newspapers that may look at something like this. Say, for example, the poorest quintile of households in urban Nagaland. And when you look at the actual sample size that comes down to, it is in the single digits. So just to make the broad point, most big Indian data sets do look at individual northeastern states. However, further analysis, if you're interested in doing over here, be aware, or if you're looking at someone else's analysis, be aware of the fact that this then goes into very narrow and small sizes for which the results are not powered enough to make claims that you will often see. So that's one sort of cautionary tale I want to put out. And the way to figure that out is in the first chapter of any report, say from the National Sample Survey, you get a list of the actual number of sample households. So then by figuring out if they're saying that just 1% of households something, look at what 1% of the size of the sample in Nagaland, for example, is, and then ask yourself if you want to be looking at or reporting or working with a finding that comes from maybe 6 or 7 households. In other cases, what sometimes happens is that the sample size is quite small for that individual state, and so as a result, the states are clubbed together. So when you see academic work of the India Human Development Survey, you'll often see northeastern states as a category there. Now this, as with good reason, angers a lot of people who feel that they don't want to see this being clubbed. You're not seeing southern states grouped as one category. Why should you see all the northeastern states, which are so distinct in every possible way, clubbed together? But the reason for this often tends to be just how small the sample size is. So with the India Human Development Survey, the sample size is, for example, 88 households for Manipur and 78 households for Mizoram. Now, it comes down to that same question. Would you rather see data for these two states presented separately, which does give you some insight into them because they are, extremely demographically different? Or would you rather see the northeastern states clubbed together with a larger sample size, which might have greater validity, but then you're losing out on some of this granularity? Of course, this is a terrible choice to have to make, and this isn't, I don't want to leave people with this choice. But just again to reiterate that, sometimes having access to this data, particularly the raw data, can give you a sort of God complex feeling of, I can now run all sorts of, analysis, and I can slice the data in every possible way, but just be aware of how small these slices often tend to be. And then in some data sets, individual indicators are not available for the northeastern states. So this is in particular a problem with the sample registration system, which produces things like mortality rates, infant mortality rates, and population estimates, as well as sex ratio. And it becomes important because some other data sources are not currently available. But you will see that for many, so the big ones like infant mortality, maternal mortality are available for all of the individual northeastern states, but some big categories are not. So this includes age-wise population estimates, which I find a particularly important, category, again, given the absence of other data sources. Another important data source that we have all had to increasingly rely upon is the census population projections. As you all know, we haven't had a census since 2011, but of the 2011 census, there were population projections made up to 2036, which all of us rely on right now. However, there are many categories again there where data for the individual northeastern states is not there, and they have been clubbed together. So I suppose I wanted to make 2 points from this. One is that if you see the northeastern states clubbed together, this is often the reason that the individual sample size of the states is too small. Now, this is not an excuse. This is something of an explanation. And the other then is to consider what is fair and valid to say about individual states. And I would say that a lot of academics too, play quite fast and loose with these narrow slices. So don't assume, full accuracy when you're seeing very narrow slices of this data. Now, this is what's there based on these broad public data sets that exist. I just want to make one other point, and in fact encourage more research and writing about this. There is a book that I'll highly recommend, written by 2 people from Azim Premji University. And this one in particular, they've written a subsequent book about Jammu and Kashmir, but this one in particular looks at Nagaland.
1 minute.
Okay, so I'm going to rush fast through this. Nagaland between 1981 and 1991, or 1991 and 2001, had India's highest rates of population growth as per the census, which defied all reason. Then between 2001 and 2011, Nagaland was the only state to show a decline in the population when by all other metrics, population was increasing everywhere. Now, a lot of academic ink has been spilled on trying to come up with reasons for this. And the conclusion of this book, which is very persuasive, is that political economy and sort of, very naked politics in a way, drove some of the, realignments that led to these population numbers. So all that I want to say is that I would like to encourage a critical look at what are considered, gospel truths, which includes the census of India, because this book in particular makes a very persuasive case for the fact, that this was not conducted in the sort of dispassionate manner that the census is often accorded. So I want to both recommend this book and recommend this lens at looking at data, particularly when it is unexpected. So just a couple of quick thoughts, and then I'm going to show Data for India for 1 quick minute. I don't want to read everything over here, but I just want to end with the fact that in addition to these large data sources, one of my learnings from the pandemic was that by looking at the bulletins that were being produced by individual states, Nagaland's bulletin in particular was exceptional, and Sikkim's as well. So I want to say that I think the state capacity that exists within individual states is considerable, and so using this as a source for other data sources, or sort of marshalling state capacity within northeastern states to produce data that could be perhaps more valid and more accurate than some of the other surveys that we're looking at, is something that I want to encourage and put that thought out there. I'm going to Venkatesh, I'm going to go 1 minute over time.
No, actually, my
By
question to
showing.
you, was going to be to tell us about Data for India. So you have more than 1 minute.
Okay, I'm going to do that.
Your questions coming, people.
So I'm going to share screen afresh now. Okay, here we go.
Tell us the story behind Data for India also.
Okay, I can do that. So, am I sharing?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So, I've always wanted to make data around socioeconomic issues in India more accessible to people, and I thought I was doing that through Indian journalism for the last 10 years. But my feeling really has been that that the incentives of journalism, and this is not for everyone, but this is my experience and my view, that the incentives of journalism are not aligned with creating long-lasting public goods. And what I wanted to do was create public goods and not create ephemeral news. So Data for India is a public platform that is free and will remain free for to expand the socioeconomic understanding of India. What we do is that if you have a question in your mind about any key socio-economic question in India, so here, for example, if you would like to understand if population growth in India is slowing down, I would want you to be able to come here to be able to read simply told piece that marshals credible data, and the data is credible not because I say so, but because of explanations around the data, as well as full access to that data itself. You'll find these simple charts which are shareable, and I encourage you to share them. And then you'll find the data behind the charts available here for download. So you can share and download the charts, but you can also share and download the data behind it. We're new, we're growing. So right now it is a selection of topics that we believe are of interest, but over time what we hope is that it becomes a place for anyone to come and answer questions they have in our mind, and not just in their mind, and not just our selection of topics. To just bring it back to what we're talking about, I want to quickly make one point, which may be more of use to journalists not in the Northeast. What happens sometimes is you look at your readership numbers and you see that very little of your readership may come from, say, North Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. And then you wonder how to show data on those states. And then if you don't show that data, it seems like you're ignoring those states. So just one of the things that we've tried to do over here we pick a selection of states when we're showing any information. So here I'm showing access to water by the source of the water. And there's a particular reason I've selected some of these states, because there's something unusual going on in some of them. I do try to make sure that I select one or more northeastern states in any selection, so that I'm not, bringing a excessively non-northeastern state perspective. But then what I also do is that I give people the option to select the state that they are interested in. So I acknowledge my subjectivity and my biases, which may mean that I am less interested in Punjab, for example, but I want to make data on Punjab available to everyone who's looking for it. So just a heads up to other journalists as well, that if you are sometimes driven by news imperatives and not able to produce data on every state, making the background data on all states available could be one way around it. I'm going to keep this open in case there are any questions around data for India, so that then I can just navigate over to it. Yeah, happy to take questions. Venkatesh, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sabina Rehman asks, thanks, Rukmini. Just to clarify, did you say that instead of national data sets that don't always rely on robust sampling, we should consider state capacity in the region that produces good quality data sets? That's the...
Yeah, it's a good question, and definitely something you grapple with, because there are certain standards and oversight that are set by national surveys, and also ability, sheer number of enumerators, and all of that national surveys are able to do, that a state level survey is often not able to do. And let's be clear about this: across the country, state level surveying, my experience has been, is far more susceptible to political considerations than national surveying so far appears to be. So let's keep it as broad as that. I'm looking forward for some states to come forward to demonstrate exceptional sampling abilities. That ability, this is the point I was making, is that ability has been demonstrated. The quality of the bulletins that were being put out by Nagaland shows that excellent quality analysis, not just data collection, but also analysis, is there within the state, and in fact worth emulating for others as well. So I don't have a direct piece of advice that, stop using this and start using that. But I suppose on both counts, both in terms of the data producers at the state level, I really want to encourage more experimentation across the country. Let's start producing more state level data, is generally something I want state governments to do. And simultaneously, let's think about particular sources that in which states are producing good quality data that we could potentially use, particularly when it's absent at the national level, or if there are large gaps. Because let's face it, it's just easier for Nagaland to do a demographic survey of its own state than wait for the national process to hit. But then it has to demonstrate objectivity and sort of fairness in producing those results.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to slip in a quick question. I think it's okay. We're about 1 minute late. Oh, wait, Faraz has asked a question. So Faraz asks, since you mentioned the data available in Sikkim, could you suggest some concrete socio-economic and ethnic data platform for the state of Sikkim?
For the state of Sikkim, so ethnic, I worry about sample sizes when it comes to the IHDS. So although IHDS would have individual ethnic categories, I would be very nervous using it for most of the northeastern states. The sample sizes really are very small. In terms of socioeconomic, the NSS is powered enough to give you state level satisfactory numbers. So, and this is something I'm happy to do, both from the NSS and NFHS. I feel like there's a lot more that can be done that than we know right now. So just as a start, if this is something you're relatively new to, I would encourage people to look at the NSS 78th round has a survey called a multiple indicator survey. It's just fun also to look at, to try and understand the range of indicators that the NSS typically looks at. Because this was a pandemic year, the NSS tried to do a bunch of things together. So what you end up getting really is a range of things, from size of land holding to whether you can write a line of code or not. I mean, I really think that's a pretty breathtaking and impressive range of indicators for a national survey to be asking. So maybe that as a start, both the NFHS National Family Health Survey 5 and the 78th round cover the 2019 to 21 period, which is relatively recent. So Sikkim will have, there will be state level representative data for Sikkim from both these surveys. I'm sorry, I don't know if this is someone who's talking at a more advanced level, in which case I could make some suggestions in the chat.
Is there an email ID or some way to contact you? That
Sure, I'll just put it in chat. Yeah.
As you're doing that, thank you so much, Rukmini. We'll thank all our speakers properly once we have finished. We have Abhinav coming up, but I just want to say that Rukmini spoke about hygiene checks. Then, of course, we had Aditi talking about large buckets of data sets, and also one that she wishes she has or is working towards. We had Tumben talk about the constraints when it comes to data collection in the Northeast. So I think we've already had three excellent perspectives on how to look at data for the Northeast, and we will end now with our final speaker. And if there's a little bit of time, we might take some questions. Abhinav will give another perspective, that he is a software engineer with a strong background in Python programming, web application development, and data science. He's also led multiple projects with Civic Data Lab. In the last 2 years, he's been working closely with MeitY and NIC, the Government of India, on developing an inclusive data platform. So with that, it's over to you, Abhinav. And I'll start the clock, and I think we're doing pretty decently on time. So maybe we can thank everyone properly at the end of this thing. So it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Venkatesh. And at first, my sincere gratitude to the Boom Live team as well as NEFN team for having me here. And thank you all the guests for joining in. I just hope at the end of this session, we all have some good takeaways. Let me try to quickly share my screen, and do let me know once it's up.
Yes, can see it.
Great. Amazing. So I'm just a bit scared because everybody had very 5 or 6 slides, and our team gets talked about what are the constraints we face when we talk about Northeast and sourcing the data. And they also talked about what are different sources from where we can get the survey data, the census data, the administrative data. I've got a lot of slides, so I will just try to rush into it and quickly jump into it. So this is how the whole presentation will be. We'll be talking about how taking a particular use case of something called IDS-DRR, which Civic Data Lab has been working on from last 2-3 years in collaboration with Assam government. So we'll take that use case and we'll just try to jump into, okay, how do we, for a particular use case, for a particular application, how do we go about finding the relevant data sources? Once we have the data sources identified, how do we actually get the data? How do we identify the variables? How do we clean the data? How do we make sure that the data is correct and it doesn't have, it's not erroneous? How do we validate the data and we generate actionable insights from that, from which the government or the people who are in the decision-making position can do something about it? So before that, the first thing which I would like to discuss for a moment is why are we focusing and why are we talking about the climate data here? So a very quick thought, I'm currently in Delhi and I am from last 4 or 5 days, and the temperature is so high here, literally I have not dared to go out of my room from last 3 days. I have been working from Bangalore from the last 10 years, and it's known as the most known for its most pleasant weather in India. But the temperature in the last month has been showing up there for around 40-43 degrees Celsius, right? An extreme weather. But these things are discomfort. These are not disaster yet, but only yet, and a matter of time when this becomes a problem where the government really needs to, or the institutions working in this really need to look into. But there are effects of climate change which are very drastic and deadly. And if we just go to the other slide, we see in Asia, Asia is the most disaster-prone region in the whole world. and 83% of the natural disasters has been related to flood or the storm events. Particularly focusing on to the northeast, if we talk about Assam, which is like the most flooded region of the state in the country, more than, as we can see, more than 4 lakh hectares of agricultural land has get affected by flood every year. And more than 3 million people get affected by the flood happening every year, with hundreds of lives lost. Around 36 million USD of property and infrastructure losses which incur. So this gives us a reason that we need to start talking about the climate data, and it becomes very much important also in context of the northeastern states, because in terms of the collection of the data, in terms of how the government's approach has been towards reducing the risk and reducing the losses, has not been so much as as it has been into the mainstream states of the country. But we have a lot of data, and we are going to talk about sourcing of data, and we all know that literally like literally millions of terabytes of data get generated every year. Even if we talk about climate data in context of India, then also like tens of thousands of terabytes of data gets generated every month. Where do we start with data? Forget about the checking the data is accurate, checking the accuracy and validation of the data. How do we start looking into that? We can't just jump into any data set and hope that by the God's grace and our sheer luck, we arrive into some insights or some analytics which would be useful. So it's always good to start with a use case. It's always good to start with a problem statement, and then think about which data sources would be relevant for it, and that data might help us in arriving at a solution for the problem, and if not at the solution of the problem, it might help us in developing a better understanding into why this problem is happening. And one such use case, as we mentioned before, has been one application which we have been trying to build from last 2-3 years, and the first version of it is already live. It's called Intelligent Data Solution for Disaster Risk Reduction. And I will also share at the end of the session, I will also share the link of that application. So it basically is a dashboard for data-driven disaster risk reduction, developed in collaboration by Civic Data Lab in collaboration with Assam government. And the platform basically has two-pronged approach of how it can help in disaster risk reduction. First, it works as a unified data repo of historical data related to climate, so that once the disaster has been it's not there, we can always go back and look into the data and try to find a pattern, and we could be better prepared, and we could be better, we could be a better place to forecast when this kind of flooding or disaster can happen. And also it has a real-time dashboard which gives a view into which of the districts or which of the revenue circles, particularly for Assam, are more prone to disaster, more prone to flooding. And also it gives a score for is it prepared? What is the preparedness score for that revenue circle or for that district for that matter. So what this dashboard will allow the government and the decision makers it will help them in deciding, suppose they are just putting out some tenders related to developing the coping capacity of a particular revenue circle. They will know where to focus and which are the most prone districts of the revenue circles on which they would want to focus. So the problem statement which IDS-DRR basically is trying to solve is, we all know there are existing data. A lot of data exists in different organizations, different sources. But this data, even not talking about the accuracy and the validation of this data are in very much silos. And what happens is that they often lack interoperability and quality. So, and when they're in silos, it becomes very difficult to make sense out of the data. So how do we bring all of this data together and try to stitch them together so that some insight could be drawn out of that? So that is what we have been trying to do. And also with this huge amount of data available, it becomes very, very difficult to gather an insight out of it, and it takes a lot of time. So as we already explained, like this application which we have built has like two-pronged approach. It works as a unified data repository for all the historic data, and it also has a real-time dashboard which gives insights into which of the districts or the revenue circles are more flood prone, and what is the coping capacity or the what is the preparedness of that district. Now, taking this use case, we'll try to move ahead into our whole session, and we'll try to explain and we'll try to discuss what does it take to build such a system and how do we even start with it. So whenever you have a use case, or whenever you have problem which you want to solve, and you're trying to find the data. Oh, okay. So it's always good to start taking the problem and then looking into the data sources which might be relevant to it. And these are like some list of basic list of places where you can start looking into the data sources, like the government data, working with the on-ground people, going through a lot of white papers, going through a lot of journals, and then finding what are the data sources which might be helpful. So specifically for the case of IDS DRR, these are like few data sources which were like very helpful for us. So as we can see, satellite and weather data, which we can get from IMD, Bhuvan, Sentinel, and demographic data, which we can get from World Pop and Mason and Todia. The past damages is specifically for Assam. There is a FRIM system which is available, which is flood reporting and information management system. And they have the historic data of the damages. And then we have the infrastructure access data. Now, once we have the data sources available, how do we go about getting the data from there? So basically, there is no clear-cut answer. It depends upon where the data lies. So, but these are basic three mechanisms which we can look into. So maybe the organization which has the data has already an API available to get the data. So if we take the example of the first one, the Indian Meteorological Department, it already provides open APIs, and it also has a Python library built on top of that to access that data, which is something called as IMDlib. But more often than not, this is not the case. The organization doesn't provide an open API, and we'll have to dig deeper into getting this data through web scraping. Now, that also could be relatively easy for some organizations and maybe difficult for others. So at some places, just by looking at the website and going through the network tab of them and the developer console of them, we can find out what are the APIs they are consuming and what are the APIs they are utilizing. And then we can directly hit that API to get the data. But again, there are places where it's not so easy, and you'll have to do a hard web scraping of the platform. And also in the cases when it's behind a login and authorization firewall, and or it's behind a captcha. And then also, it's very useful to go and talk to the team, the people who are working on the ground, to get a data dump if possible, and to build that connection capacity on the ground to get the data dump directly. That eases out the process very much. This is a basic list of normally the sourcing tools and mechanisms which we have utilized, and which you can also utilize during the work of your data analysis and data sourcing. So starting with Excel, Python is a very good library for data scraping, and then there is something called Scrapy, Selenium, ArcGIS, QGIS for getting GIS related data, and there are also a lot of browser extensions that are available for easy sourcing of the data. This is just an example of how we got the data from Bharat Maps related to the road availability, the length of the roads, the number of and the location of hospitals, schools available in different districts of Assam. Now, quickly jumping into what are difficulties that we face during the sourcing of the data. So first is data is not always available at one place, it's available in silos. So you have to get the data from multiple places. There is no clear documentation of the APIs which is available to get the data. The data scraping also becomes very difficult when the data is behind an authorization firewall. And then there is, of course, the inconsistency in the data formats. And if the data formats are different, how do you stitch it together? This is just an example of when we are getting the data from Bhuvan, what is the problems that we faced. So from Bhuvan, we got the data for inundation and the flooding data for Assam. And this lists down the problems which we face. Similarly, for Bharat Maps, the problems which we faced while we try to get the data. But once we have the data, how do we go about data cleaning? How do we rely on that data, and how do we validate the data? So you need to put some manual checks and you need to put some validation mechanisms to make sure that there is no missing data. If there is missing data, how do you deal with it? And also, like as one of our speakers were talking about, it's always good to rely on multiple sources of data and then compare which data has more granular and more high resolution data, and then compare it. Always helps in creating the data. Now, we were talking about like data is available at different places, and once we have the data, how do we stitch together? So one such example was we were getting the data from Mission Antoria, and those data were at like village levels. It was not at revenue circle level, but our analysis was to be done on revenue circle level. So we had to geocode every like village for revenue circle, and then we had to stitch the data together to get the final data, cumulative data at the revenue circle and district level.
Hey,
Once you
Abhinav.
have the data and hi.
Hi. I
I'm
think
so
we're like,
sorry.
no, not to worry. So we are like 5 minutes extra and it's eaten into the Q&A time. So if you can just wrap up
Or with
now.
just
Yeah.
Great. I'll just take one more minute of time, and this might be the last slide. So we
Yeah.
talked about how do we source the data, how do we clean it, validate it, and how do we stitch the data together. And then on top of that, once we have all these things available, then how do we create an analysis on top of it? How do we gain an insight on top of it? So specifically, if we see on this slide, for ITSDR, the things which we see in the green are different types of data which were like scraped or which were gathered together, they were cleaned. And then if we see, like there were two different models which were utilized. One was random forest and the another was something called data envelopment analysis. To calculate 4 different types of scores. One is hazard factor score, then exposure score, vulnerability score, and then the coping capacity of that particular district or revenue circle. And a cumulative of these was used to calculate the final risk score of one particular district, how much the district is at risk. And this is a screenshot from the application, and below is the link of that. So if we just see in the right, like it just shows high risk districts. What are the high risk districts for a particular year in Assam? And yeah, basically, I would just like to close with like if we start digging into the data analysis, how do we go about it? So it's always good to start with a use case, work with the on-ground team to get a better context of the whole problem, to get a better context of like what kind of data sources we need to look into, follow multiple mechanisms of getting data, always clean and validate the data, and stitch the data if needed, and then build insights and application on top of it. And I'm so sorry it ate up a lot of time into the Q&A, but with this, I'd like to close and thank you so much. If there are any questions, I will take that now.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very helpful to see how an organization tackles data challenges. So we've had a good snapshot, how a researcher tackles it, how a government servant tackles it, how a corporation or an organization tackles it, and how someone who releases data for public good challenges it. I think those of you who need to jump off right now, thank you so much for joining us. Very, very happy that you came and stayed here for so long. And also a very special thank you to our speakers, starting with Tumbentang, then Aditi, Rukmini, and finally you, Abhinav. I think we can treat this as like the official close. I'm going to unofficially, slowly, close it out by maybe asking a few questions. If anyone's available to speak, any of the speakers, great. Otherwise, if you have to leave, go for it. This recording, by the way, we'll put up on YouTube. That is boomlive.in's YouTube channel. And we'll also continue to bring you more programming from the Northeast Facts Network. We'll also ask you if you're doing a good job. We don't know. It's been 6 months. We have another 6 months to go. And then we'll hopefully leave something special that people can use as part of the Northeast Facts Network. And it'll be a public good, again, that will stay on. Does one need to know how to code? How many of you I think Rukmini is left, but Abhinav, you clearly have to do a lot of coding, but answer that question. How long have you had to code? And then let me see if Aditi and Tuminthang also need to code for anyone starting a data career.
So you can't do research without, at least the field that I'm in, without coding, it's just not possible. But my backstory for this is I had before I joined my job at Development Data Lab, which required working with massive data sets and building open data platform, and kind of 2.5 years of my life was spent just coding. Before that, my only formal in-class computer science experience was in undergrad. I took a Python class, intro to Python, and I got a C. It was the lowest grade I've ever gotten in my life. And I was like, okay, that's not for me. But 5, 6, 7 years later, my life has been all about data, and I don't seem to be able to move away from it. All of the coding that I've learned has been kind of on-the-job experience. And yeah, I don't know if Abhinav, you have a similar story, whether it was formal training that led you to it, but all the hacks I've figured out has been embarrassingly long initial 7, 8 hours for simple problems, and it kind of came along. One plugin I will make is that it's just so much simpler to pick it up today with ChatGPT, and I can talk about that. The harder question is thinking about what do you want to do with the data. Say I've pulled all of the data from, I don't know, the NFHS 2019 survey, and it's very rich. But if you don't have a question in mind, you don't know kind of where to begin. So that till date is still the hardest thing. And then just over the past semester, I've had to pick up like 2 to 3 languages I'd never worked with. I just had ChatGPT open, which just makes it so easy. You literally write out sudo in words that I have this data set, this is what I would like to do in this language, and you get the bare kind of infrastructure you can work off of it. But I just wanted to say that I started off with no promise with anything to do with data, and that's my life now. So
Yeah, I think we should probably do a session in which we ask people to say, how do you work with ChatGPT, and how do you ensure that you don't bring in the ChatGPT's hallucinations or inaccuracies when it comes to data, and just maybe use it as a thinking tool or a teaching tool. Maybe we should do a session on that. Abhinav, there's a question for you. Because we've kind of wrapped up, do you want to just answer it? Hi, Abhinav. AV asks, how much percentage of the time spent on a project is spent on pre-planning before you even start looking for data sources? And on tasks such as cleaning. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, I would say a lot. I would say a lot. This groundwork which we do even before we start looking into the data sources, understanding the problem on the ground, understanding and talking to the people, majorly doing the stakeholder consultations, what we call. That does a lot of that helps in preparing a lot for the things which would be upcoming, and eases out the further process a lot. It just makes the whole process of sourcing of data and from where to get the data, what kind of data is required. It just simplifies it a lot, and you get like a lot of idea into where do you look for the data, what kind of data do you need, and you don't have to do any other work. So this on-ground work is very much required. But again, a lot of time also goes into the data cleaning and data validation, because as we all know, the state of the data, not only in our country, like throughout, is like, and that's why the nature of the data. It's not because of a problem of an institution or something. Since it's raw data, a lot of time goes into cleaning, validation, and putting this data together. But yeah, that takes a lot of time.
Great. So that's been a quick fire kind of introduction to the work of these 4 excellent researchers, and also a work into the way they think and what they think is useful for you all. And it has been super useful for all of us. It's been very useful for me, certainly. So on that note, thank you so much. Dinner time, breakfast.